The land stretched far and wide, rolling gently beneath the vast Oregon sky. The blue mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks softened by the haze of late afternoon light. It was a quiet place, untouched by the rush of modern life, where the wind carried the scent of pine and the whisper of 1,000 forgotten stories. Samuel Whitaker sat on the porch of his weathered farmhouse, a steaming cup of black coffee cradled in his calloused hands. The wood beneath him creaked as he shifted, his bones protesting the movement. 64 years of life had made him familiar with the aches and pains of an aging body, but he had learned long ago not to complain. No one was around to listen anyway. He had lived on this land for nearly 40 years, first with his late wife, Margaret, and later alone after she passed. His children, grown now with families of their own, had long since left for the city, where the promise of steady work and easier living had called them away. They visited when they could, but those visits grew fewer with each passing year. That was fine, Sam told himself. He had never been much for company anyway. Out here, the rhythms of the land dictated his days, the rising of the sun, the shifting of the seasons, the steady work of tending to what little remained of his cattle. There was a comfort in that, in the predictability of it all. But if he was honest, and he rarely allowed himself to be, the silence had grown heavier in recent years. It pressed against the walls of the house, filled the spaces where Margaret's laughter used to be. Some nights, as he sat on the porch watching the stars blink into existence, he would catch himself talking to her, his voice barely louder than the rustling leaves. Margaret had always been the talker between them. She could fill a room with warmth, her laughter like the crackling of a fire on a cold night. She had believed in things, in kindness, in second chances, in the idea that even a worn-out old soul like Sam could still find purpose. Sam wasn't sure he believed in much anymore. The road leading to his ranch was long and empty, cutting through fields of golden grass that swayed lazily in the late summer breeze. It had been weeks since anyone had come down that way, save for the mail carrier who dropped off bills and catalogs he never read. That was why, when he spotted something dark lying on the side of the road, his weathered brow furrowed in surprise. At first, he thought it was nothing more than a shadow stretching across the dirt, a trick of the light. But as he drew closer, something in his gut told him otherwise. He eased his truck to a stop, dust swirling around the tires, and stared out at the unmoving form in the grass. A dog. Even from a distance, he could see that it was in bad shape. Its fur, what should have been the rich tan and black of a German shepherd, was dull and matted with dirt. Scars crisscrossed its body, a silent testament to a past filled with hardship. The animal was barely moving, its chest rising and falling in slow, labored breaths. Sam sat there for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, debating what to do. He was no stranger to strays. Out here, it wasn't uncommon for people to dump unwanted dogs, leaving them to fend for themselves in the wild. It was cruel, but not surprising. He exhaled sharply and muttered under his breath, "Damn fool thing to get involved." Still, he found himself opening the truck door, his boots crunching against the gravel as he stepped out. The dog's ears flicked at the sound, but it did not move. There was no fear in its eyes, only exhaustion. Sam knelt beside it, his hands rough but gentle as he reached out. "Hey there, boy," he said quietly. "Looks like you've had a hell of a time." The dog's gaze met his, steady and knowing, as if it understood far more than it should. And for reasons Sam couldn't quite explain, he knew this was no ordinary stray. Sam let out a slow breath as he studied the dog in front of him. Up close, the animal looked even worse than he had thought. Beneath the dirt and dry blood, its ribs pressed sharply against its skin, and the muscles in its legs trembled with exhaustion. But it wasn't just the injuries that unsettled him, it was the way the dog held itself. Even in its weakened state, it did not cower or flinch. There was no whimpering, no attempt to drag itself away. Instead, it watched him, those amber eyes unblinking, assessing him just as much as he was assessing it. This was a dog used to hardship, used to waiting for commands, used to discipline. Sam knew that look. It was the look of a soldier. He ran a rough hand down his face, debating what to do. Taking in a stray was one thing. He'd done it before, back when Margaret was alive. She had a way with animals, could mend anything with a soft word and a warm meal. But this dog wasn't just some lost pet. Still, he couldn't leave it here. Sam stood with a groan, his knees stiff from kneeling. "All right, boy," he muttered. "Let's get you out of the dirt." He stepped back and gestured toward his truck, half expecting the dog to ignore him. Instead, to his surprise, it stirred, pushing itself up on shaky legs. The effort seemed monumental, but the dog did not hesitate. It took a single step, then another, and then, as if summoning what little strength it had left, it climbed into the passenger seat. Sam let out a dry chuckle. "Guess that means you're coming with me." The drive back to the ranch was quiet. Sam didn't bother with the radio, he never did, but even without music, the truck wasn't truly silent. He could hear the dog's breathing, steady but shallow, could feel its eyes on him every so often, studying him the way a wary traveler sizes up a stranger at the crossroads. By the time they reached the house, the sun was beginning to set, casting long golden streaks across the fields. Sam parked near the barn and turned to the dog. "Come on, let's get you inside." The animal hesitated for just a second before hopping down from the truck. Even in its weakened state, it moved with a quiet precision, its head swiveling to scan the land as it followed Sam up the porch. Sam held the door open, expecting a moment of hesitation. But just like before, the dog made its decision with quiet resolve, stepping inside as if it had already decided that this place was safe. That night, after washing the dog's wounds and giving it some leftover stew, Sam sat back in his chair and watched as it curled up on an old blanket by the fire. A name. The dog needed a name. Sam thought of the way it had fought to stand, the way it had surveyed the land like a guardian protecting its post. "Eagle," he murmured. The dog's ears flicked, but it did not stir. "Yeah," Sam said. "That'll do." And for the first time in a long while, the house did not feel quite so empty. Sam woke before dawn, as he always did. Years of working the land had set his body to a rhythm that no amount of age or aching joints could break. He rolled out of bed, stretched stiff muscles, and shuffled to the kitchen to put on a pot of coffee. As the rich aroma filled the house, he noticed something strange. Eagle wasn't on the blanket by the fire where he had left him the night before. Sam's first thought was that the dog had wandered off, maybe slipped out through the back door. But as he stepped onto the porch, coffee mug in hand, he saw a dark silhouette moving across the far edge of his property. Eagle. The dog was patrolling. Sam narrowed his eyes, watching the way Eagle moved, silent, purposeful, scanning the land like a sentry on watch. Every few yards, the dog would pause, ears pricked forward, nose testing the air. Then, just as smoothly, he would move again, circling the house and barn with a methodical precision that sent a chill down Sam's spine. This wasn't the behavior of a lost pet. This was training. Eagle wasn't just wandering, he was securing the perimeter. Sam leaned against the porch railing, sipping his coffee and studying the dog's movements. He had seen this kind of vigilance before, years ago, when he was stationed overseas. The men in his unit had trained alongside K-9 teams, watching in awe as the dogs swept through compounds with sharp efficiency. Eagle wasn't just trained, he was highly trained. The realization made Sam's grip tighten around his coffee mug. What kind of life had this dog led before ending up half dead on the side of a dirt road? When Eagle finished his circuit, he trotted back toward the house. His amber eyes met Sam's, and for the first time, Sam felt as though he was the one being evaluated. "You're not just any dog, are you?" Sam murmured. Eagle simply sat, posture erect, tail still, watching him. Sam exhaled through his nose. He had planned to let the dog recover, maybe take him into town in a few days to see if anyone had reported a missing German Shepherd. But now, he wasn't so sure. Eagle wasn't lost. Eagle had been left behind. And Sam had the uneasy feeling that someone might come looking for him. Sam wasn't a man easily rattled. He had seen his share of things that made a man take his coffee black and his words few. But something about Eagle sat heavy on his mind. The way the dog moved like a soldier, the way he took up a post by the door each night instead of curling by the fire, this wasn't an animal adjusting to life on a farm. This was a dog waiting for orders. That afternoon, Sam decided it was time to get some answers. He loaded Eagle into the truck and headed toward town. The drive to Baker City was a quiet one. Sam kept his thoughts to himself while Eagle sat in the passenger seat, eyes scanning the roadside like a co-pilot on high alert. The veterinary clinic was small, run by Dr. Rachel Monroe, a woman Sam had known for years. Rachel had taken over the practice after her father passed and had a reputation for knowing just about everything when it came to animals. If anyone could tell him more about Eagle, it was her. The bell above the door chimed as Sam walked in, Eagle at his side. Rachel looked up from her paperwork and gave Sam a curious glance. "Well, now. I didn't take you for a dog man." Sam shrugged. "Didn't either. But this one found me." Rachel's eyes softened as she took in Eagle's lean frame and the scars along his back. "Looks like he's been through hell. You bring him in for a checkup?" Sam nodded. "And maybe something more." Rachel led them into the exam room, where she ran her hands over Eagle's ribs, checking his joints, his teeth, his ears. "He's underweight, but otherwise in good shape." She lifted his paw, inspecting the worn pads. "This isn't a dog that's been running loose. These are the paws of a working dog." Sam figured as much. Rachel reached for a small scanner on her counter. "Let's check for a microchip." Sam wasn't sure what he expected, but when the scanner beeped, something in his gut twisted. Rachel frowned at the screen. "Well?" Sam asked. Rachel hesitated, glancing up at him. "He's registered." "That a bad thing?" She exhaled, pressing a few keys on her computer. "Not usually. But this is odd, there's hardly any information here. Just a number and a training designation." Sam leaned forward. "Training designation?" Rachel turned the screen toward him. There, next to the chip ID, were two words that sent a cold shiver through him. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew it was something bigger than just a lost dog. Rachel clicked a few more buttons, then shook her head. "That's all I can pull up. No owner, no handler, no retirement record." She looked at Eagle, who was sitting calmly on the exam table, watching them both. "That's not normal, Sam. Government-trained dogs don't just disappear from the system." Sam ran a hand over his beard, considering. Eagle had been left for dead. And now Sam had a highly trained, unidentified military dog sitting in his kitchen every night. Rachel must have seen the look on his face. "You thinking about keeping him?" Sam exhaled through his nose. "Think I already have." Rachel smiled. "Well, then I'd keep a close eye on him. If he's part of something classified, someone might come looking for him." That was what Sam was afraid of. Back at the ranch, Sam poured himself a whiskey and stepped onto the porch. Eagle sat beside him, ears perked, watching the darkened fields. "You got secrets, don't you?" Sam murmured, taking a sip. "Thing is, I don't much care what you were. You're here now. That's all that matters." Eagle's tail thumped once against the porch. Sam let the silence settle between them. But deep down, he had the nagging feeling that whatever Eagle had been trained for, it wasn't finished yet. And neither was the trouble that was coming. The first sign of trouble came 2 days later. Sam had spent the morning repairing a section of fencing on the east side of his property, where a few stubborn cattle had taken to pushing through weak spots. The work was slow but steady, the kind of task he didn't mind. Out here, things were simple. You fixed what was broken, you took care of the land, and the land took care of you. But as he drove back toward the house, he noticed something that set his teeth on edge. Tire tracks. Fresh ones. The kind that didn't belong to his old truck or the mail carrier's van. Sam slowed to a stop, staring at the dirt road leading up to his ranch. It wasn't often he had visitors, and when he did, it was usually the same few people, Rachel checking in, the ranch supply guy dropping off feed. But these weren't their tracks. Eagle sat up in the passenger seat, ears pricked forward, posture tense. He smelled something. As Sam pulled closer to the house, the unease in his gut hardened into certainty. A black SUV was parked in his driveway. 2 men stood beside it, dressed in suits that didn't fit the rural landscape. They looked like they'd be more comfortable in a corporate office than standing on an Oregon cattle ranch. But it wasn't just their clothing that put Sam on edge, it was the way they carried themselves. Too stiff. Too controlled. And the way their eyes lingered on Eagle the moment Sam stepped out of the truck. One of them, the taller of the 2, stepped forward and extended a hand. "Mr. Whitaker, is it?" Sam didn't take the handshake. "Depends who's asking." The man let out a practiced chuckle, as if he was used to playing friendly. "Name's Harrison. My associate here is Mr. Morris. We're with Westwood Development Group. We're looking to acquire property in this area." Sam glanced between them, then at the SUV. "Not selling." Harrison kept his smile, but Sam noticed the tightness around his eyes. "Oh, we're aware. But we wanted to discuss some potential opportunities regarding your land." Morris wasn't smiling. He wasn't even trying. He was looking at Eagle. Sam felt the dog tense beside him. "You've got quite a dog there," Harrison remarked casually. "German Shepherd mix, right? Looks like he might have had some training." Sam didn't blink. "Just a stray I took in." Morris's lips twitched, like he was trying to suppress a smirk. "Strays don't usually carry themselves like that." Sam folded his arms. "Something you boys want to tell me?" Harrison exhaled through his nose, glancing at Morris before reaching into his pocket and pulling out a business card. "If you reconsider, give us a call. We'd be happy to take the dog off your hands, too." Sam took the card without looking at it. "We'll be in touch," Harrison said, tipping his head before heading back toward the SUV. Morris lingered a moment longer, still watching Eagle. Like a man sizing up something he thought already belonged to him. Then, without another word, he turned and followed Harrison. Sam stood there as the SUV disappeared down the dirt road, leaving behind nothing but dust and a gnawing sense of unease. Eagle let out a low, rumbling growl. Sam didn't stop him. The night was darker than usual, the kind of blackness that made the land feel larger, emptier. A storm was rolling in, distant thunder grumbling low across the Oregon hills. Sam sat on the porch, a shotgun resting across his lap, a habit he hadn't indulged in for years. Eagle was restless. The dog had been patrolling more than usual, his movements sharper, his pauses longer. Every so often, he would stop near the tree line, ears pricked, nostrils flaring. He knew something was coming. Sam could feel it too. He'd spent the better part of the day thinking about those men. Harrison and Morris. The way they had looked at Eagle, the way they hadn't even tried to pretend they were here for the land. They weren't investors. They were hunters. And Eagle was the prize. Sam exhaled through his nose, took a sip of whiskey, and watched the land. He had lived out here for nearly 40 years, and never once had he felt unsafe. Now, for the first time, his home no longer felt like his own. Eagle sat at the edge of the porch, eyes locked on the road. His tail was still, his body tight. Sam whispered, "What do you hear, boy?" Eagle didn't look away, didn't so much as flick an ear. Then Sam heard it too. Tires on gravel. Sam's heartbeat slowed, steadying like it had back in the old days, when the wrong kind of silence meant things were about to go south. He stood, setting his glass down on the porch rail. Eagle let out a low growl. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of something foreign. Something wrong. Then, just as quickly as the sound had come, the engine cut off. The only thing left was the whisper of the trees and the distant roll of thunder. Sam moved inside without a word, Eagle shadowing him. He shut off the lights, reached for his old revolver in the drawer by the door. The shotgun was good for warning shots. The revolver was for when warnings didn't work. Outside, footsteps. More than 2 sets. Sam flattened against the wall, listening. Whoever they were, they moved too smoothly for common thieves. No stumbling, no chatter. They knew how to stay quiet. Military, maybe. Or something close to it. Eagle's growl deepened. Sam reached down and brushed his hand against the dog's back. Not yet. A shadow passed the window. Then another. They were circling the house. Sam felt something inside him settle. Fine, then. If they wanted to play this game, he'd play. He moved toward the back door, stepping light, every motion deliberate. Eagle stayed at his side, waiting. Sam cracked the door just enough to see outside, and his blood ran cold. There were 4 of them. Dressed in dark clothing, moving like they had done this before. One was near the barn, another along the side of the house. The third was by the truck. The 4th was staring straight at him. Sam barely had time to react before the man lifted something, a radio, maybe, or a weapon. Eagle launched. The dog exploded through the doorway, a blur of muscle and motion. The man barely had time to shout before Eagle was on him, teeth flashing in the moonlight. Sam didn't wait. He moved fast, pressing his back against the outer wall, gun raised. The second man near the truck turned, drawing his own weapon. Sam fired first. The shot cracked through the night, and the man dropped with a sharp grunt, clutching his shoulder. Not dead, Sam wasn't aiming to kill. Not yet. The other 2 scattered, disappearing into the dark. Sam didn't waste time chasing them. Instead, he turned back toward the first man. Eagle had him pinned. The guy was struggling, but not much. He knew better than to fight a trained dog. Sam moved closer, pressing the barrel of his revolver against the man's temple. "Who sent you?" The man sneered. His lip was bleeding. "You already know." Sam glanced at the truck, at the injured man groaning in the dirt. Then back at the one beneath Eagle's teeth. Yeah. He knew. Westwood Development. They weren't land developers. They weren't businessmen. They were cleanup men. Sent to collect what wasn't supposed to be lost. Sent to retrieve Eagle. The man beneath him laughed, a low, bitter sound. "You have no idea what you're in the middle of, old man." Sam pressed the gun harder against his skull. "Enlighten me." The man only grinned, his teeth bloody. "It's bigger than you. Bigger than this town. You think you're keeping a dog? You're sitting on something people would kill for." Sam stared down at him, and a slow, familiar feeling settled into his chest. Not fear. Not uncertainty. Resolve. He flicked his eyes to Eagle, who hadn't moved an inch. The dog's grip was firm, but not deadly. Waiting. watching. Sam took a deep breath. "You tell your boss," he said, voice calm, "that I'm not selling. The dog stays with me." The man's smile didn't falter. "He won't take no for an answer." Sam stood, holstering his revolver. "Neither will I." He gave a sharp whistle. Eagle released the man immediately, stepping back with trained precision. The man coughed, rolling onto his hands and knees. "Take your friend," Sam said, nodding toward the injured man by the truck. "Get off my land." The man didn't argue. He staggered to his feet, dragging his wounded partner with him. A moment later, the truck's engine roared to life. Sam and Eagle stood in silence as the taillights disappeared into the night. The storm broke overhead, rain beginning to fall. Eagle turned his head, watching Sam. Sam looked down at him and nodded. "Yeah," he muttered. "I know. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot." The rain had settled into a steady rhythm by the time Sam closed the front door behind him. He set his revolver on the kitchen table, exhaling slowly. The adrenaline was fading, but the weight of the night still pressed on him. Eagle shook the water from his coat, then walked to the door, ears still pricked, body still tense. He wasn't convinced the fight was over. Neither was Sam. He poured himself a cup of coffee, the whiskey forgotten. He needed a clear head. His hands, steady as they had been in the moment, trembled slightly as he lifted the cup. The man's words echoed in his mind. "You're sitting on something people would kill for." Sam had lived on this land for nearly 4 decades. He knew every stretch of field, every ridge, every inch of his property. Or at least, he thought he did. But the old silver mine, it was the one place he never gave much thought. The entrance had been boarded up long before he bought the land. But Eagle had been interested in it from the beginning. He set the coffee down and rubbed a hand over his face. Rachel's words from a few days ago drifted back to him. Government-trained dogs don't just disappear from the system. Sam had dismissed it at the time, but now, he couldn't shake the feeling that Eagle's presence wasn't just chance. He grabbed his raincoat and his flashlight. "Come on, boy," he murmured. Eagle didn't hesitate. The night was thick with mist as they made their way to the mine. Sam's boots squelched in the mud, and the wind carried the scent of damp earth. When they reached the entrance, Eagle stepped forward first, nose to the ground, muscles taut. Sam ran the beam of his flashlight over the boards covering the entrance. They were old, weathered. But there, just near the bottom, fresh disturbances in the dirt. Someone had been here recently. Eagle let out a low growl, his eyes fixed on a small, half-buried marker near the entrance. Sam crouched down and wiped the dirt away. It was an old government survey marker. And etched into the metal, beneath layers of grime, were 2 words that sent a chill down his spine. Project Guardian. Sam swallowed hard. The dog. The men. The mine. It was all connected. And now, whether he wanted to be or not, so was he. Sam stood in the rain, staring at the metal marker embedded in the ground. Project Guardian. The words meant nothing to him, not yet, but they carried the weight of something much bigger than an old mine. Eagle sat beside him, tense, ears swiveling at every sound. The dog already knew. This was what he had been guarding all along. Sam exhaled and stood, gripping the flashlight tighter. If those men came back once, they'd come back again. And next time, they wouldn't knock first. He turned back toward the house, but Eagle didn't move. The dog stayed rooted to the ground, staring at the mine entrance. Sam hesitated, then followed Eagle's gaze. The dog's instincts had been right every time before. Maybe they still were. Slowly, he stepped toward the boarded entrance. The boards were old, cracked from years of exposure, but someone had disturbed them recently. Sam reached out and pressed against one. It moved slightly. Someone had been trying to get in. Or trying to hide something. Sam wasn't sure which was worse. A sharp gust of wind blew through the trees, sending a shiver down his spine. He wasn't going to solve this mystery tonight, not in the dark, not with those men still out there. But he could be ready when they came back. Sam rose before dawn, as he always did. But instead of fixing fences or tending to the land, he reinforced the house. He checked the locks, boarded up vulnerable windows, pulled out the old generator he hadn't needed in years. He dusted off his rifle. And through it all, Eagle watched. By midday, Sam had set up security cameras along the perimeter, rigged to his laptop. A luxury he never thought he'd need, but now it felt necessary. At sunset, the cameras picked up movement. Sam clicked on the feed. His stomach twisted. 2 SUVs. Coming fast. Sam stood and grabbed his rifle. Eagle was already at the door. This time, they weren't waiting for an invitation. The vehicles skidded to a stop outside the ranch, kicking up dust. The men from before stepped out, but they weren't alone this time. 4 more. Armed. Sam exhaled through his nose. They weren't here to negotiate. A voice called out. "Harrison." "Mr. Whitaker," he shouted, his tone no longer friendly. "Let's not make this difficult. Just hand over the dog." Sam didn't move from his post by the window. "Come take him," he called back. There was silence. Then, a single gunshot shattered the quiet. Sam fired first. Eagle lunged. The battle for the ranch had begun. The gunshot echoed through the valley, swallowed quickly by the rolling Oregon hills. Sam had fired as a warning, not a kill shot, but he knew it wouldn't be enough to scare them off. From his position by the window, he saw the men hesitate, their carefully controlled confidence flickering. They hadn't expected resistance. Eagle, low to the ground, had already positioned himself near the back door, eyes locked on the intruders. The dog knew this was more than a fight. This was a mission. Harrison raised a hand, signaling his men. A tactical retreat. Sam watched as the SUVs backed away, tires spitting gravel as they disappeared down the road. For now, it was over. But they'd be back. Sam exhaled, setting his rifle down. He knew what had to be done. Later that evening, Sam sat on the porch, a fresh cup of coffee warming his hands. The fight had stirred something in him, not fear, not anger, but purpose. For years, he had convinced himself that life was winding down, that he was just another old man left behind by time. But now he had something to protect. Eagle lay at his feet, his ears still flicking at every sound in the distance. He hadn't fully relaxed, but Sam understood. The war wasn't over. Not yet. His mind drifted back to the old government marker near the mine. Project Guardian. Whatever was buried under his land, it was valuable. And dangerous. Tomorrow, he'd take a trip into town. He'd talk to Rachel, maybe even make a few calls to people who still owed him favors from his military days. He needed to know exactly what he was protecting. Sam reached down, scratching behind Eagle's ears. The dog leaned into the touch. "You were trained for this," Sam murmured. "You're a soldier." Eagle looked up at him, his amber eyes steady. Sam let out a slow breath. "Guess I am, too." The porch light flickered as a cold breeze rolled in. Sam took one last sip of coffee before heading inside. The fight wasn't over. But now, Sam and Eagle were ready. Together. The wind whispered through the trees as Sam locked the front door behind him. The house felt different now, not just a place of solitude, but a fortress. A line in the sand. He had spent so many years believing his best days were behind him. That his role in life was to watch the seasons change, to let the past fade with the turning leaves. But fate had other plans. Eagle hadn't just stumbled onto his land by accident. The dog had chosen him. And Sam, for the first time in a long time, felt like he had something worth standing for. Tomorrow, he would start digging deeper, not just into the land, but into the truth of what lay beneath it. He'd find out why those men wanted Eagle so badly. Why they were willing to kill for something buried in an old mine. But for tonight, he let himself rest. Eagle curled up by the door, ever watchful. Sam sat in his chair, the weight of his rifle familiar against his hands. Outside, the Oregon night stretched wide and silent. The battle had begun. But Sam and Eagle weren't going anywhere. Not without a fight.